Hi, everyone. I'm Sarah Brookbank, and welcome to the Northern Kentucky Chamber's special edition spotlight on the upcoming election. Today, I invite you to listen in on this bipartisan discussion about the upcoming election happening on Tuesday, November 5th. This conversation between Shane Noem and Kevin Burton touches on the presidential election, what polling looks like a week out from the big day, and local races to keep your eyes on. Like I said, Election Day is Tuesday, November 5th. In Kentucky and Indiana, polls are open from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., and in Ohio, polls are open from 6:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. As it is a presidential election, expect to see longer lines at your local polling location. As a reminder, if you are in line at the end of polling, so in Kentucky at 6 p.m., you will be allowed to vote on Election Day. Do not leave the line. If you want to skip the lines on Election Day in Kentucky, early in-person, no excuse absentee voting is taking place on Thursday, October 31st, Friday, November 1st, and Saturday, November 2nd. You can visit your county clerk's website or visit govote.ky.gov to see where you can cast your ballot. You can also check your clerk's offices in Indiana and Ohio to see what early voting options are available to you. Now I'm going to turn you guys over to Shane and Kevin, and I thank you so much for joining this conversation.
Hello, and welcome to this special edition podcast on the 2024 general election. My name is Tami Wilson, and I am the Northern Kentucky Chamber's Vice President of Government Relations and Business Advocacy. The content of today's podcast is something new for the Northern Kentucky Chamber, and I'm confident you'll find it engaging and informative. Today I'm joined by two Northern Kentucky political strategists, Shane Noem and Kevin Burton, who happen to work on different sides of the political aisle, yet are friends. There are several things we wish to accomplish in this bipartisan conversation over the next 20 minutes or so. First, we want to inform our members and the Northern Kentucky community about the candidates and the issues on the November ballot. Second, remind everybody about the importance of voting, especially here in Northern Kentucky. And finally, we want to demonstrate that civil conversations about policy and the issues of the day are possible and essential. Civil discourse and political conversations is crucial to our collective success. And your Northern Kentucky Chamber is about fostering an environment of growth, ideas, and commerce. So with that thought in mind, gentlemen, let's get to it.
All right. Looking forward to it.
All right. So Kevin, we'll start with you. Briefly share your perspective on the national races, the balance of Congress, and how you see that playing out.
Well, I just think it's fascinating that, Harris is running a sprint race for 4 months. She's running for presidency, which is bad news for consultants everywhere, because if she pulls it off, shorter term, I think she's going to pull it out. I still think about the 60% of Americans who wanted someone other than Trump or Biden. I think the Senate will go to Republicans. It's just a hard district. The House, I think, is 50-50, but I think the Democrats are going to pull it out.
Shane, how about you? How do you see this?
Well, we've got an interesting dynamic. The Republican nominee is a known entity and has been for a decade. Voters know where they stand. You love them or you hate them. And so I think we're in a situation where you have a nominee on the other side that was anointed, not elected by anybody. There was a party switcheroo over the summer, and she's not been tested. And you're in a crunch to the end, as you said, and she's showing that she can't withstand the heat of a campaign. And running short on time, people are starting to see there's less substance there than they were originally sold on. So I think this is locked up. We're looking at Wisconsin and Pennsylvania really being the battle lines here, and the momentum's there. Blue-collar voters are shifting the Republican Party in record numbers.
I would like to just two things. One, she was on the ballot. When you vote for president and vice president, we've voted for her multiple times, and she was a senator, and she's a vice president. But to your point about the blue wall, it's going to decide everything. I think Pennsylvania is the Alamo. Yeah. We're going to know fairly early. She's got to rack up about 500,000 in Philadelphia County, so that's going to be the number to take a look at.
Yep, all eyes up north.
So in short, can you tell me what you think the breakdown of that U.S. House and Senate and the White House, how it's going to fall?
I think that the Republicans probably pick up Montana, so I think they'll end up having the majority, and then Congress, I think it's going to be very, very, very close. I think it's going to decide on the New York, actually, Republicans, if they hold them or lose them.
Yeah, I've not seen Republicans so bullish on taking the Senate in a long time. I think Montana seems to be in the bag for us, and then West Virginia. and that gets us to where we need to be. So at the end of the day, this is a good dynamic for Republicans. Momentum's on their side.
So do you see House Democrat, Republican, White House? That's what I'm looking for. Where do you see the White House, House, and Senate? What party affiliation is going to win?
Well, Americans really like divided government.
Yep.
We also like to complain about divided government. So I think there's a good chance that you have divided government. But with that said, there's really a lot of wind at Republicans' backs at this particular moment. I think the House is the big question mark in my mind. There's just so many districts. We can decry redistricting changes landscapes. Okay, it has changed landscapes for generations. But you do have a situation where districts are pretty predictable at this point, and there's very few toss-up districts. And so we're only looking at a handful of races around the country to decide the House. And, the Republicans have a majority right now, a tight majority. But all we need is a couple more, and it's a good night.
So do you see the Democrats doing a clean sweep? Or
no, I think they'll win the White House, and then I think the Congress, but I think Senate will go to. Just the maps of West Virginia and Montana, those are hard districts to win.
So there's definitely a handful of states that folks should be watching very closely
100%.
on election night. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to shift gears just a little bit. Shane, we'll start with you. We're going to turn our eye to the Kentucky constitutional amendments on the ballot this year. Tell us quickly a summary of both of those amendments and how you see that playing out here in Northern Kentucky as well as the entire state.
Yeah, constitutional amendments are a funny thing. Over the last 20 years, I think there's been 17 of them that have passed out of 20. But we've only seen, the 22 cycle where both failed, and then we've got 2 on this cycle that are up for the test. Amendment 1 is an interesting one, and it's kind of Kentucky being on the front edge of a policy. You got this dynamic where certain really big city politicians are pushing for non-registered voters to vote in local elections. We're talking school board and city council races. And it's kind of gray area. It's kind of this ambiguous question of whether they can or can't. It's clear they can't vote, non-residents can't vote in federal elections. But this idea that they could vote for school board or city council. So this is Kentucky getting out in front saying, we're going to make it clear that no, if you're not here as a legal resident, you can't vote in our elections. So that's Amendment 1. There's a lot of political talk on whether this is just red meat to throw on the ballot or not, but at the end of the day, it's good policy. So whatever the intention is, vote for good policy. Amendment 2 is the one that everybody's been talking about. And not to be confused with Amendment 2 from 2 years ago, which was on the question of abortion. Amendment 2 this year is a school choice measure or an education funding measure. And I just want to read the ballot language because I think this is really the crux of it. It is proposed to be a section added to the Constitution that reads the following. The General Assembly may provide financial support for the education of students outside the system of common schools. So the two sides on this debate come down to, are you for school choice and allowing tax dollars, your individual tax dollars, to follow your kid to a different school, whether it's the public school system or non-public, or using tax credits or education savings accounts, a whole plethora of things that 48 other states get to take advantage of? Or do you want to protect the public school system and say that every dollar Kentucky allocates needs to be put into the public system? And where this question even comes from is from a Supreme Court case. The Kentucky Supreme Court ruled that any dollar spent on K through 12 education must be spent in the public school systems. But I'm in favor of Amendment 2, and I think this is an interesting dynamic. You've got CCAP funds for early childhood education. You can take those to Head Start program, to a public preschool, or to a non-public child care center. Same with your KEYS money. These are considered public dollars, tax dollars that are put towards education incentives. You can take that to Thomas More or NKU, public or non-public, post-secondary institute. But this court has arbitrarily said if it's mythically K-12, then it needs to be put in the public system, putting the legislature in the system where we have to go the Constitutional Amendment route versus doing this like 48 other states have done.
So, Kevin, your perspective.
A lot of red meat. For Constitutional Amendment 1, I don't think anyone is in favor of people not voting if they're not here. But do you know the total number of election fraud cases they've found since 2016? 8. And 7 of them was from one scheme alone in Monroe County. So you want to talk about red, juicy meat, this is it. I don't think anyone's against the policy in general, but the election fraud isn't a thing. Now, this is where we differ a lot. Who's the largest employer in most of the 120 counties? The school districts. With passing this, you're going to cut jobs. Boone County Schools itself is the third largest employer in northern Kentucky. You're going to cost millions of dollars in funds to be diverted from them, both in Kenton and Boone. And we've seen when teachers get mad, they vote. Remember 2019 with Andy Beshear. So I think it's going to fail.
Well, it's interesting. We hear all this rhetoric about schools closing, and the NEA is really good at scaring everybody across the country, but it's never based in fact. The states that have the most robust school choice programs see a maximum of 12% take advantage of this. We're not talking about a large chunk of cash flooding out of the public system. And my pushback would be, you mean to tell me that the public system is so terrible that a dramatic amount of people are going to just mass exodus all at once to take advantage of some resources? And let's be frank about what this does is this opens up charter schools, which are public schools. This opens up education savings accounts, which you can use for tutoring. You can use for a lot of things for students that are in public schools. So this idea that there's going to be some apocalyptic scenario is always trumped up for elections, and the teachers unions are the masters at scaring the dickens out of people.
Well, we've talked a lot about Amendment 2. How do you see Amendment 1? What is its landing pad going to be here in Northern Kentucky and across the state?
I think it's going to pass. I don't really see, there's not a lot of opposition against it. The one thing I want to just circle back on issue 2 real quick, I'm sorry. People move to Boone County for the school districts. That's why you move there. And charter schools sound great, but if you're in a small county in Kentucky, are they going to come? What's the revenues that they're going to get? We got to keep our public schools.
Well, clearly this is going to be a conversation that continues on for the next 11 or 12 days until leading into the election itself. So turning to the State House and Senate, and I think, Shane, you're up to do this one. Or no, wait a minute. No, we're back to you, Kevin, to start. What are the competitive Northern Kentucky legislative races, and are there some elements to those races that are important to the business community?
I think there's 3 critical, and I think you would agree on this: House 67, 69, and Senate 23. Is that? I think those are the 3 most crucial. We really got to think about who we want down in the legislature. Do we want to continue the Andy Beshear policy of growth? If we do, we need to change some of the people in office. Under Andy, we've seen record growth. The rainy day fund has almost grown over $2 billion. Lowest unemployment, ranked 3rd nationally in per capita. So I think we got to continue the growth, continue Andy Beshear's policies.
So where do you see maybe a potential pickup for the Democrats or a hold?
So I think I think a hold of 67. Matt Lehman is running a strong campaign. I think that's the most likely. I think the Dietz race is going to be very, very competitive. It was last time against her versus Buddy. I do think Senator McDaniels, he has probably been the most influential Northern Kentucky politician since Joe Meyer. He's done a lot of great things, but for probably 97, 98% of the people voting, they're going to vote against him because of his stance on abortion. But I still think he probably pulls it out at the end.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you got an interesting dynamic where there's only a few pockets of competitive races up here. Most of the districts went I wouldn't say most, but a lot of the districts went unopposed, which is a trend we've seen more and more. 67 is interesting. That's the northern part of Campbell County. Hatton versus Lehman. This is an open seat left by Rachel Roberts' retirement. Hatton's a strong candidate. That's a Trump district, as we call them. Trump won the district. The Republican trend lines are heading in our favor over there. So I think that's a really competitive one. I'm not sure I could call that one at this moment, but I would say definitely don't rule Hatton out. He's out there working it hard. 65 is the one that I think in Northern Kentucky is the most competitive for sure. The other 2 around the state, Representative Susan Witten and Ken Fleming down in Louisville, those 3 make up the ones that all eyes are watching statewide. But Dietz's district, that's a blue district. Covington's always been a blue stronghold, but she was able to cut in. Partially because of redistricting made the map more favorable, but also because she's a really good candidate. Her voting record is across the aisle. She's got a really good voting record for the district. So I'm still putting money on Dietz winning that race, but that's going to be a close one. It was close 2 years ago, and it'll always be close, no matter who's in it. But 23, I think, is the most important one, especially for chamber members and folks in the business community. Senator McDaniel's been down there for, I think, about a decade now, but he's, not just being a senator, not all senators are created equally. He uniquely helps Northern Kentucky punch above its weight as the chair of the Powerful Appropriations Committee. And we saw that this session with the amount of money and resources that he was able to bring back to Covington to reinvest and to invest in strategies to grow our economy. And so I think, while yes, the heated rhetoric around abortion on the national level is going to trickle down, and we have this moment where the suburbs are kind of purple-ish, I think at the end of the day, folks are looking at their pocketbooks and what's best for their backyard and their community, and leaving the national rhetoric on the national scene. And I think they'll put McDaniel across the finish line.
And I think one thing that's interesting is Kentucky is one of only 7 states that allow straight ballot voting. So that's somewhere where, it's really interesting in a presidential year, and Shane knows this. It changes the whole electorate when you're trying to get to that win number.
It is, and it's funny, when we were in the minority, we like to complain about that a lot, right? But now, don't touch it. Nope, don't talk about it. Don't look at it. We love straight ticket voting. And, I see the debate on that, too. It's like, oh, is that just people are being lazy and blindly supporting? Okay, well, they're going to do that anyways. Let's give them a data point to make a judgment on. So it's just another factor that's fun to play with.
We're reaping what we sowed.
Totally. Totally.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you guys adding that element of how that's important for businesses. The funding that Senator McDaniel has brought back to our region has been pretty impressive, and so I'm certain that's definitely going to probably be one of the more clear-cut races in Northern Kentucky here at the end of the day. So let's talk about some local issues and that are on the ballot this November that you guys specifically have been watching. Just to name a few: medicinal marijuana, maybe the school board races, and the Covington Strong Mayor. Some people may not even understand that that's in Covington, the city of Covington, that is something that's going to be on your ballot about the structure of the government in the city. So let's talk about that.
Sure. All right. I'll dive right in. So I think those are the main highlights that you're looking at. The local races. There's city council races. There's school board races. We've got these medical marijuana votes locally, which I think are fascinating. This is almost like the old wet dry situation. We're voting at this on a local, hyper local level, and really, I'm gonna be a little opinionated here. Really, what we're doing is this is a proxy discussion for recreational. This is, there's medical marijuana is a real thing. But the USDA hasn't legalized yet. So the states are taking it upon themselves to have this discussion and decide where we want to have medical, what it looks like. We've got this really complicated process. When at the end of the day, a lot of the people advocating for medical marijuana are the advocates for recreational marijuana. And so to some degree, I'm kind of like, let's just get to the recreational discussion and debate that out and debate the merits of whether we want recreational marijuana, which I'm less opposed to than I am medical. But you get to decide as a voter in most communities in Northern Kentucky right now. Cities were the mechanism to put this on the ballot. Mm-hmm. And so cities and counties, Kenton County, I believe, voted not to not have a countywide ordinance, but that opened it up for all the cities in the county to do it. There's an application process for folks that want these licenses, and they can only go in the certain approved areas. And there's only like 76 permits, and there are like 6,000 people apply for the permits. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. The school board and the city council, I always advocate for people getting involved and paying attention to these local races. While it's sexy and exciting to follow the national stuff and the state stuff gets interesting occasionally, your school boards and your city councils can raise your taxes higher and faster than any other level of government. They have a greater impact on your day-to-day life than Frankfurt or DC does. Yet, I bet most of us couldn't tell you half of your city council members You might know who your mayor is. You may or may not know what a judge executive is. But really, I encourage everybody to look up your city races. We don't have a lot of competitive ones. And far too often in Northern Kentucky, we have this unique situation where not enough people file for running for office. So then somebody gets to waltz in, really unelected, into a seat. And it's not healthy. We need more people running for these local offices. We need more turnover. You shouldn't be sitting on a city council for 30, 40 years and not have anything to show for it. But that's my soapbox for today.
That was a lot. So I think first and foremost about medical marijuana. I know in Florence it's a big issue. It's going to be on the ballot. Kentucky was behind on sports betting. And look at how much revenue we've gotten this year. Ohio just legalized it. They made $76 million in less than 50 days. Where we live, let's be practical, they're going to go over there if they truly need it. For the people who this is for medical reasons, I mean, I think it's a strong growth. I mean, think of the payroll tax that you're going to get from these businesses, the sales tax. To your point about the city school board and all that, I 1000% agree. The unopposed is the worst thing that you can ever do. The best thing for society is to have competition, to have different beliefs and to hear them out. And then the Covington strong mayor, I'm actually fascinated. I think it's the one thing we agree on.
Yeah.
I'm always for a strong mayor because I think, to the majority of your point, most people think that the mayor controls everything. And I just think it brings accountability. Then you know exactly where the buck stops. So I'm always for a strong mayor. And if you look across the river, what John Cranley did the last decade, look at the growth, you know exactly where to point to.
Yeah. Jumping back on marijuana side of things, the thing that makes me a little uncomfortable in this is we're pushing this from and you're not alone, Republicans are in favor of this for the same reason, for the tax revenue side. And we don't really tax medicine in this country. And so we got a situation where we're creating an industry excited about the tax revenue off of people being hurt and needing medicine. And so it's kind of made me uncomfortable. Again, I just want to get to the recreational debate. I'm kind of indifferent. Like, if you want to get high, get high. But I'm just weird by, hey, let's rush through this medical situation. But the strong mayor, absolutely. I think we both agree. Mayor Joe Meyer and I don't agree on a whole lot. But he's come out very strong that the mayor in Covington needs to have more power. And I agree. This is Newport and Covington are our big cities. They're our urban core. They need to have a little bit more ability to set a vision and execute their vision. And right now you've got some really good folks working at City Hall, but there's a lot of this, well, it's not my job. Council members can say, it's not my job.
100.
Staff can say, oh, it's the elected officials. We're following their lead. If you have a mayor, the mayor is then accountable, a strong mayor. They're accountable. They're help. Every 4 years you can send them packets. So folks have asked me, well, what if you get a bad mayor? We've got bad mayors around Northern Kentucky. Just saying that. There's some good people, but they're bad mayors. But you got to send them home. The voters have to be accountable. And if the mayor can say, oh, I have a city manager, it's their fault, not mine, then you don't have the accountability that we need.
Well, yeah, and I want to echo your point about being involved in local races, because it does impact your day-to-day much more than the statewide or even definitely the national scope and those races. We need to get more people involved at the local level, both sides of the aisle for sure, and to have a stronger, basis of what's actually happening here in our region and being in that involvement. It's valuable. So especially for the younger millennials and Gen Xers, or not Gen Xers, the Gen Zers coming up, I'm an Xer, coming up through the ranks, take some time to understand those races. And I think the change in Covington might be really helpful. That current structure is a little different. There's only a handful of cities throughout the Commonwealth that have that structure. And so understanding your local government, that may be helpful. And I have heard that that's a bipartisan, pretty much an understanding of that is a bipartisan placement. A lot of people see the value in that change. We'll see how it shakes out. Do you think that on the ballot is going to impact the statewide races or the local races? Would that be the government structure change? Do you see that having any influence on the other races?
I don't. As a Republican watching the 65th and every vote matters in that kind of a race. I look at all the races on the ballot in Covington. You've got aggressive school board races, you've got competitive city council races, and you've got this vote. But none of those are really driving turnout in this cycle. If this was 2 years ago, I would say absolutely those three factors would be driving turnout. But in a presidential election, Trump versus Harris, that's turning out all the enthusiasm.
Even if you were Jeff Bezos and you were running for school board, you're still not going to it's still not going to make a difference. But to your point about getting millennials and Gen Zers involved, if anyone listening to this, please contact Shane or myself, and we're happy to put you in the right direction, because that's how we all got our start. And local races are so important because you're actually involved in the community.
Absolutely. Well, we're talking about turnout here, so we're going to wrap up with this final question from both of your perspectives. How important do you see turnout in Northern Kentucky? We know it's very, very critically important in primaries, but in a general, how do you see that playing? And how important is turnout for our region as a whole?
I think turnout should always be high. I mean, I've always said if 95% of people vote and it goes Shane's side, I can live with that because that's what a democracy is, In a presidential year, it's usually pretty good, but it's the off-year elections that we really just got to get engaged, and I just want everyone to have their voices heard. Even if it doesn't go my way, I think it's important that everyone participates in democracy and they go vote. Secretary Adams has done one heck of a job expanding voting in Kentucky, and I think he deserves a kudos for that.
Absolutely. Much to the detriment of some of his voters who criticize him for expanding voting from my party. But it's been great and welcome to expand access to voting. I want to take this from two angles. One is I agree 100%. More informed voters, the better democracy we have. We shouldn't be excited about 65% turnout. That's what we're going to have is probably 65% turnout in Kentucky. But that's high. That's considered a really high turnout. Northern Kentucky, we need to keep turning out high to make sure that our voice is heard downstate. But I'm also going to have a controversial hot take on this. We talk a lot as a region about, our turnout lags. Our turnout's not great. I think we have actually got a little bit of a misnomer on this. We are a unique region in Kentucky, the economic engine. We have a lot of people moving here for jobs and then moving out to go somewhere else, temporarily moving here, move to Cincinnati. We've got a major city across the river from us. Louisville doesn't have that. Lexington is landlocked. And so my theory is our voter turnout is a lot higher than we think it is. We're probably on par, if not exceeding the state average. However, our voter rolls have been bloated, and we have a lot of people that are sitting on the voter rolls, messing with the perception that we don't show up. We show up at state average, but there's so many people that just can't get taken off the list because they haven't met the time requirement to be removed. I've been living in my house for 10 years, and the previous owner's daughter is still registered at my house. So there's just a lot of these mechanisms that we still need to continue to work out to have us get a real snapshot of what our turnout is. But back to the premise of more people turning out is good for Northern Kentucky and it's good for democracy.
And I also do wonder how Northern Kentucky we're the third largest metro area in Kentucky, but we don't have, are we second?
Second.
We really are.
Oh,
yes, that's a really important point.
So second, and you look at Fayette, we don't punch above our weight. And that's where I think collectively, if we can all come together as a region and as a community, listen, we may disagree, but we don't get what we deserve in Frankfort for most of it. And I just think it's important that, everyone be heard.
Yeah, and I do. Let's be real. Our legislators pay attention to turnout and who votes and the impact of that and the influence of that. Let's just talk directly here about turnout. It's critically important. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Primaries seem to be more of the way in terms of the importance of turnout, but it's, as you guys articulated, anytime you have the opportunity to have your voice heard, especially those in the business community, you need to take advantage of that. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing in this really fun kind of bipartisan conversation. And as we wrap things up, I do want to thank you for being here. I believe I can speak for all three of us by saying, everyone, please have a voting plan. Early voting has already started. Excused in-person voting started Wednesday, October 30th. It will run through Wednesday, October 30th. No excuse in-person voting is available starting Thursday, Halloween, October 31st through Saturday, November 2nd. And please check your county clerk's website for specific locations and hours for those polling locations and spots. Election day, again, is Tuesday, November 5th. Polls are open at 6 a.m. and close at 6 p.m. If you're in line, stay in line at 6 p.m. You are legally able to vote. Thank you for tuning in to today's special 2024 general election podcast. Get out and vote, Northern Kentucky.